In OWCS Stage 1 EMEA, we witnessed Twisted Minds go on to win yet another European title to stay on top of the world over there. But now that's old news. OWCS moves fast, and we're on to the next stage. Stage 2, here in April, has already started, with the Swiss Stage qualifier already being done with, and now we're moving back into another rousing round of the group stage before inevitably deciding who goes on to the main event that will decide who accumulates enough league points to make it to the Dallas mid-season LAN event. There's a whole lot at stake, and there's both new and old faces participating, which should make for some banger matches and some interesting storylines. If you want to know all about EMEA Stage 2, then you've come to the right place. Let's start with the important general info, so you know everything that's going on. So first things first, this event will begin on April 12th, and the groups will run all the way until April 21st, and after that we will move into the also important Stage 2 main event. And this event is not only important just because of the circuit points that are good for the long run and the Dallas event, but also because the first place winner is automatically going to that Dallas major, regardless of how many circuit points they have compared to the other top teams. Like Stage 1, it's going to be 4 groups of 4, first to 2 maps as usual, and I didn't know this the last time, and I apologize for that for those of you who are watching who are maybe a little confused, but not all of these group stage matches are going to be broadcasted live on the actual Overwatch esports channel, but there's still a chance to maybe catch up on some of these games if one does catch your eye if it's not being played live, as you have certain players who may be streaming their POV on Twitch, not to mention you have the Badpachimarileague, which is a great resource that tends to live stream some of these matches as they're going on, so definitely check out them as well. Links will be provided in the description. When it comes to how the game's going to be played with meta outlook and who that technically means it'll favor, right now it's rather unclear. Based off of some of the stuff that we witnessed during the Swiss stage from people streaming their point of view, it seems like it's primarily going to be a lot of either full-on dive with Winston or D.Va, or a lot of the Ramatra / Orisa Rush compositions. That seems to be the standard, depending on the map type and what you're comfortable with, but this is very subject to change, and I think it's very important to keep that in mind, as Overwatch Season 10 is right around the corner, and who knows how the patch, as well as the new hero, could affect how things are played if they do indeed end up making an impact, and if it's something that is played on in this current tournament. At least for this weekend, though, it seems like we're going to see one of either of those two styles. And interestingly enough, with these meta shakeups have led to a slight alteration in the overall standings of how the Swiss stage went compared to what we saw in Stage 1. Here are your top 16 moving on to the groups. The big thing to note is that Spacestation Gaming, after a disappointing Stage 1, are back on top. The London boys managed to end up getting an undefeated record during the Swiss stage, taking home that #1 seed. It seems that the transition to more of the dive stuff has greatly benefited them, as it is something they have practiced quite a bit, but not far behind is going to be ENCE yet again in second place, only losing their match to Spacestation Gaming, and then Twisted Minds, the champions of Stage 1, moved down from 1 all the way to 3, losing games to both Spacestation and ENCE. Then right after that, you have a couple of variations, some new faces here and there, but you'll also notice that Peps and Oblvione both successfully made it back yet again, both making that top 8. Interestingly enough, Oblvione, they did go through some, I guess you could say controversy if you want to, maybe drama's the better word, but they went through some stuff with roster construction, and they had to panic to find a tank at the last second because they weren't allowed to bring Mag over for Stage 2, so instead they opted into having Don, at least for the time being. He's probably one of the only real good tank options out there for them right now, because Chase did decide to go over to ENCE. But even through it all, they persevere, and they're still here, and they're basically the same roster outside of that tank situation, so they're still a dangerous team no matter what. All in all, 9 teams from the Stage 1 groups successfully made it back for the Stage 2 group stage, and that's a pretty good number overall. That shows some good consistency in this region, and at this point, we kinda know who the favorites are and who the main staples are. Let's do a small breakdown of who's looking good to get out of the groups and potentially go on to win this entire main event. I'll go through all the interesting storylines storylines and the main teams, as well as some other ones that catch the eye for various reasons. First and foremost at the top, as I was just saying before, you've got Spacestation Gaming, aka the former London Spitfire Boys, plus Psycho and Funny Astro. Things are finally starting to turn for Spacestation. Even though they had a disappointing Stage 1, they stuck to their craft, they continued to practice, and all of that hard work trying to master dive definitely paid off now that the meta more so caters what they were doing. They looked great out there with their execution, only dropping 2 maps the entire Swiss stage, one of which came to ENCE, which is no surprise, and they also swept Twisted Minds, so looking really good overall. They are a threat, and they should be getting through this group stage no problem. We'll have to see what happens afterwards if there's meta changes mid-season, just like we saw during Stage 1. But if things stay how they are, they just might be able to go all the way and punch their ticket to Dallas automatically. Then you have your top 2 and 3 teams, ENCE and Twisted Minds, who both ended up falling to Spacestation, but generally were still mostly in control. ENCE basically only struggled with Spacestation. There was a couple of hiccups here and there, like a random dropped map to Peps, which is kind of bizarre, but mostly they showed off what you're looking for out of this team. They added Chase during that brief off-season period. He is now on the squad. Him and Vestola make for a very versatile and solid tank line, and with Tracer being really good right now, it's just absolutely perfect for Kevster, and there's no reason to be playing him on Symmetra now. Right? ENCE were really close to having that number 1 seed. They just fell short in a close game against Spacestation, and if they were to play them again, it just might be a different outcome. You never know. And hey, another bonus is they 2-0 Twisted Minds, the team that they lost to in the Stage 1 final, so that's also a really good look for these guys to be in control against one of the most dangerous teams in Europe. As for Twisted Minds, their stocks maybe went down a little bit after the Swiss stage, as they got 2-0'd by both Spacestation and ENCE, adversaries that they beat consistently beforehand during Stage 1, going to show that maybe the meta is affecting them a bit right now, and it's maybe not in the perfect place for them in terms of comfort. It's a weakness that you've got to keep in the back of your mind. However, this is a team that you cannot count out. Love or hate them, we all have to realize that when it matters, when everything's on the line, this team typically shows up. They've been doing it literally for like 2 years now, regardless of the event. This core has consistently been dominating the competition and playing so well in any sort of championship scenario, and I have no doubt that they could do the same thing here, even through the struggles. That's just the type of team they are. That's how resilient they are. They have good players, excellent teamwork, they trust each other fully, and what's so important is that they're great with those adjustments. They live and learn very fast. They play mind games with you by banning maps that they were playing on before. They change up their composition after a certain matchup. They're not afraid to do those things to find victory. So if these teams aren't prepared for something like that and they crack the code, they're going to be left behind. Twisted Minds are in an interesting state, but I definitely would not be counting these guys out. They're still right there. It's also worth noting that Twisted Minds maybe weren't fully prepared for the scenario, as just like with Oblvione, they went through a bit of a roster crisis beforehand heading into Stage 2. They thought they could add Korean players who played in OWCS Korea Stage 1, but they could not. They have to wait until Stage 3. They added both Kellen and Vigilante to their teams, and maybe they could make a difference in this type of meta with their understanding, but for now, they're gonna have to press on without them and figure out a way to win. Speaking of Oblvione, definitely a team to still keep your eye on, even if they're maybe not quite as strong without Chase. I mean, again, like I was saying before, it's essentially the same exact core, but just with some different tanks now added into the mix. Shockwave, Cloud, Cookie, Crispy, Canale. We've seen their consistency, we've seen them grow with their confidence, even playing up to the likes of Twisted Minds and Spacestation. They had a pretty decent Swiss overall. They're still here, they're still breathing, and with their experience, that could take them a long way over some of these other teams who are maybe trying to get into that top 4. The question is going to be how they play at that tank position now without Chase, though, and I think they'll be okay. I like Don. I don't know too much about tools, but I think that Don has always been somewhat reliable in his career, hasn't played on a solid team in a long time. This is a good opportunity for him. He's always been more on the flexible side with his hero pool, and he's not horrible at Winston and stuff like that either, so I could see him doing enough to help this team still be solid, and they are still very much subject to making an upset happen to one of these unsuspecting top teams. To familiarize ourselves with some of the other top teams, just to run it down real quick, first is Team Abhik. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but they managed to get 4th place with a solid 9-2 record. Not too shabby for a team that is just coming around for the first time. They've got a mixture of a couple of solid players across various countries, including the likes of Psycho and Lauren at DPS, Abhik at support as well. It's not a horrible team, and they actually had some pretty impressive results. They weren't always playing the cleanest, but they won a ton of close games against a bunch of the other group participants. Dominating imperfection is in its own class, of course, but I think a good quality comes with winning a lot of close games against teams that you're likely to play against that are around your level in this top 16. It goes to show that you can be clutch when it matters, that the pressure doesn't affect you as much. In those high pressure scenarios, in like a map 5, or in their case during the Swiss, a map 3 scenario, they're not going to budge. They're going to make the correct reads and reactions in real time. That's a great quality for a team to have, and they just might be a sleeper to get out of the groups because of it. Then there's a team like Ataraxia, the 5th place finisher, and another newcomer. These guys have been around the scene for a while in terms of the organization in the EU contender scene, and they've got a couple of household names out there, pretty solid team, a lot of guys that you can depend on in the clutch, and they mostly only lost to teams that they should have lost to. Then there was that close match to Team Peak. It went to like a map 3, I believe. That was very winnable, but they just couldn't come through, and overall, I don't think their record necessarily demonstrates how high their potential really is. I think this team can go far if they figure it out, and they're another one of those suspects that could very easily make it through the groups and be relevant beyond. Then you have Team Peps, as I was mentioning previously. They're back, and their team is slightly different compared to what it was before. In my opinion, it actually looks a bit better compared to Stage 1, since they added in ENCE to their team. They have a good 3-man DPS rotation with him, Naga, and Stelios. I think that could work good for them. There's some questions about how they'll do in specific metas, but we've seen them put up some good fights, including taking a map off of ENCE, so maybe this team could be on the up and could very well get through the groups yet again, and maybe win a series or two if they do make it to the next part of this. Just to run through the rest of this, you've got a couple of names returning, like, oh yeah, they were really fun to watch because Kaya and his goated Junkrat was in there. I don't know if we're going to see that with where the meta is right now, but one can only pray, and they might even have a chance to get out of their group, which is amazing. Sheer Cold is back, but their roster looks a bit different compared to the previous iteration, so maybe not as much confidence in their ability to perform and be competitive against some of the lower end teams, but we'll have to see. Then you also may have noticed there is a lack of Rock Esports, and in their place they're going with Umbrella Academy. It seems just like the Academy version of Rock. They're coached by Kareev, Rojo is here, TVNT and AOI as well. There's no Checkmate or Izayaki though, which is interesting. Don't really know what happened there, but this is kind of the new squad that they're rolling with for this. Maybe not as much confidence in them now since they're without those Korean players, and they haven't always shown the best results outside of like a Sig meta and then maybe Ramatra. How they do in like a dive setup could be very questionable, but one can only hope that they can figure it out. It's also intriguing to see the likes of Super Shy and Diempero make it here. They both just came up short in the Stage 1 qualifier, so some good progression was shown overall compared to the previous stage, and they're maybe worth keeping an eye on. You have Diempero, who took a map off of Spacestation during the qualifiers, which is awesome, and then Super Shy you may recognize as the team that took a map off of Twisted Minds and pushed them to their limits during the Stage 1 qualifier, and they've got some solid players like Will and Pack on there. A really cool team for sure. They're kind of in an unfortunate group, but it's cool to see some progress after seeing them sadly come up short beforehand. Then there's perhaps the biggest surprise of all, the number 16 seed, the last possible team that could qualify. A team with SK, ML7, and Boger on it. It's unbelievable to think that a team like this was able to make top 16, but hey, go off. That's great for the viewership, and it's cool to know that these guys are going to have the opportunity to play on a live broadcast. Not something that I ever thought was gonna happen. People have been dreaming of ML7 playing on a stage like this for a long time, so I'm sure the fanboys are gonna be wild to see him go out there, even if in all likelihood they're gonna get crushed like every single game. It's just cool to see some familiar faces make it in there like this. But that's essentially what the group stage is looking like and what I think of the main teams, I guess you could say. As for how the groups are gonna go, it feels like some of them are rather cut and dry, while others are maybe up for interpretation. Starting with Group A, it's a pretty interesting mix, Oblvione and Spacestation going back at each other, the scrim rivals, so to speak. Spacestation has a chance to get even more revenge on these guys by absolutely dominating them into the ground. I think them and Oblvione should probably just get through. I don't see how Super Shy or Schmungus are going to beat them. Shout out to SKML7 and Boger, but oh man, it's going to be rough watching them play against Spacestation. In Group B, we'll have to see who inevitably joins ENCE. We know they're getting through without a shadow of a doubt, but Sheer Cold, Peps, and One Man Army all have a decent opportunity at this. Usually, I would say Sheer Cold maybe have a chance. They can get some revenge against Peps after the previous stage, but their roster looks a lot different now, and I'm not as confident in them, and I think Peps got slightly better and have shown some good results in the Swiss, so I'll just go with ENCE and Peps to make it through. With Group C, it's a matter of who's joining Twisted Minds, of course, and in the end, I decided to pick Piero. It's kind of just a pick your poison type of deal. None of these teams are all that relevant. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but these guys, I feel, have come a long way since the last stage. They've grown as a team. They've gotten better. They took a map off of Spacestation and Peps. They've been relatively consistent. They're well coached, so why not give it to them? And finally, there's Group D, where there's maybe the widest possible room for interpretation. I'd say Ataraxia, Aya, and Abheek all have a decent shot of making it through. I'm going with Ataraxia and Abheek personally. I think they're both just the two most solid teams in this group. Ataraxia have a lot of the names that you're looking for to at least make it beyond this point. I think they'll be a solid dive team, and they should make it through without too much of an issue. Abheek over Aya maybe is a bit of a hot take compared to previous thoughts I've had on Aya, but they haven't looked as good this stage. I feel they played a lot of close games against teams that they probably should have beaten more easily, and Abheek has shown that they have been a very clutch team, and they've kept up with a lot of the solid teams that are in this very group stage, so I'm going to take a shot at them and say that they ride that momentum and get through Group D. Those generally are my thoughts on the 8 teams that I believe will make it through. There's some room here and there for some upsets to happen, but I think generally this is going to be rather cut and dry. Now, how things go beyond this week could be a bit more questionable and could change the outcome of some matches, especially if the Season 10 patch really ends up making a difference with that meta. We'll have to see. It's really a week-by-week basis. It always feels like that right now in OWCS, so we'll have to stay tuned and see what happens. Regardless, this is the start of a very big month ahead of us as we inevitably decide who gets through EMEA and goes on to Dallas, and ultimately puts themselves in a great position to later qualify for Sweden in the first ever OWCS Championship. Let me know your thoughts on the EMEA groups down in the comments below, who you think the favorites are, what surprises could be in store for us, and what in general you're going to be on the lookout for in terms of these big storylines. And of course, if you enjoyed the video and you want to stay up to date with all of the most recent OWCS news and tournaments, give this video a big fat thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Stay tuned, NA videos coming soon. Appreciate you guys a lot, and I'll catch you in the next video.